Genesis is the book of beginnings. The word Genesis literally means the beginning, or the beginnings. Genesis is the book of beginnings, and in the book of beginnings, it reminds us something about why God has established this people, not because of God's anger, or because God picks on somebody and says, I'm going to choose you for destruction. Sometimes we place that upon God. God's this big ugly ogre somehow or another, that He's pointed out a group of people and said, you're the people I hate. It's not that at all. But He has said that sin will be judged. It must be judged, and it will be judged. And why? Why Babylon? Genesis chapter 10 gives to us insight there. Look with me starting in verse 8. We find the listing in Genesis, and that's hard sometimes to read, And the sons of, Javan, verse 4, Elishab, and Tarshish, and Kittim, and Rodanim, and the rest of these names, that some of them you cannot pronounce, and we sort of do that in our scripture reading, don't we? I see it, it looks good. But look at verse 8. Follow with me. Cush. Don't you just love that name? I believe the next child we have, we're going to name him Cush. It'll be Cushy. I don't know. I don't like that name. Cush was the father of whom? Nimrod, who became a mighty warrior on earth. Now listen to the statement. He became a mighty warrior on earth. Yet, verse 9, he was a mighty hunter before God. It was in his hunting that God was honoring, but his in warrior-like characteristics was not before God. He transitioned. His life was transitioning. Nimrod was a mighty hunter before the Lord. That's why it said, like Nimrod, a mighty hunter before the Lord. The first centers of his kingdom were Babylon, Erech, Akkad, and Calneh in Shinar. From the land he went to Assyria, from where he built Nineveh, Reboth, Ir, Calah, and Rezin, which was between Nineveh and Calah, and that is the great city. And then we see the listing go on. Follow with me just a little bit. Would you jump to chapter 11 with me? Now the whole world had one language, and it had a common speech. As men moved eastward, they found a plain in Shinar, and they settled there. And you know what happened there? They decided they were going to build this monument unto themselves that reaches to the heavens, so that everyone in every place all across the known world could see and recognize their great accomplishments. And what did God do? That's all right. That's why there's Chinese and French and Spanish, and all kinds of languages spoken across the world. Because of man's arrogance. Because of his insatiable greed for recognition and honor. And where did it all begin? It was in the plain of Shinar. And the tower that's most commonly recognized in that tower is called the Tower of Babel. Babel means the confusion of languages. But it also became the beginning of the great city that Nimrod would oversee, which would be Babylon. You see, Babylon began with an insatiable greed of a people who were overwhelmed, who were consumed with the need for honor and recognition and power, possessions and all the rest. And their history never changed. So it was only notable. It was only right for God, as He was establishing world orders, understanding the future that would be coming, to recognize that in Revelation chapter 17 and 18, that the establishment in that last day for the harlot church and the harlot government of the world that's seeking after only self-honor and self-glorification. It's a god of themselves. That they would also be recognized by the beginning of that, namely of the city of Babylon. And yet it's in the middle of all that Habakkuk struggles. Even understanding the judgment that's coming upon Babylon, Habakkuk struggles because he cannot understand how such a pagan, a vile, a city of terror and wickedness and every word could be used to bring about judgment against God's own chosen people. They are an insatiable greed for possessions, for position, for power. God has not forgotten their greed. And the message to Habakkuk is that it's time for the chickens to come home. They had an intolerable greed. But secondly, verses 15 and 16 in particular, they were in the midst of an immoral government. An immoral government. In Hitler's day, some of y'all remember him, or at least have read about him, right? Adolf Hitler. In Hitler's day, he made the statement, what if we lose 100,000 men if only we get what we want? Because that's all that matters. You see, the Babylonians shared that same kind of motto. And God pronounces the woe upon Babylon, upon this immoral government that had no concern about humanity at all, but only about their self-promotion. Verse 5 of the passage, let me remind you back to verse 5. Indeed, he says, wine betrays him. He's using the issue of alcohol. He is arrogant and never at rest. But what is he going to be doing with that alcohol? Verses 15 and 16. He gives drink, he says, to his neighbors, pouring it in the wineskins until they're what? Drunk. So that he, Babylon, can do what? That he can gaze upon their nakedness. And it was because of the shame that they were causing upon the peoples around them that ultimately that same shame will one day come back and visit them. And that shame had its center in the use, or here the abuse of alcohol. I read an article some time ago, and I've copied it, and I thought this would be an appropriate place for this to be stated. It was in the Houston Chronicle, and this is the article, this is what it said. Alcohol is a product of amazing versatility. It will remove stains from designer clothes. It will also remove clothes from off your back. If by chance it is used in sufficient quantity, alcohol will remove furniture from the home, rugs from the floor, food from the table, lining from the stomach, vision from the eyes, and judgment from the mind. Alcohol will also remove good reputations, good jobs, good friends, happiness from children's hearts, sanity, freedom, spouses, relationships, man's ability to adjust and live with his fellow man, and even life itself. As a remover of things, the Houston Chronicle said, alcohol has no equal. What a statement. I'm often asked as Pastor, what do you think about drinking? Does the Bible really say that drinking, that thou shalt not? My immediate answer is always, no, it doesn't. It doesn't say that. And then I think it attempts for us somehow to justify our variance from an abstinent lifestyle. We use kinds of scriptures that tell us, Paul told Timothy, take a little wine for your stomach. This is what I always follow up that statement with. While the Bible may not say, thou shalt not, it gives us some principles that we ought to live by. One of those principles is that as a believer, I ought to live above reproof.